Good morning. Excellent. So, it's good to be at Star Trek. It's been a few years. I spoke here, I think 3 years ago, something like that. Everybody hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, perfect. I did like an introductory level JavaScript talk 3 years ago. Was anyone in that talk by some random, we got one hand? A few? Anyone remember what happened at the end of that talk? Yeah, so I talked a bit about the TSA. People weren't quite expecting that, and it sort of, got people a little disturbed. So if you were in there and that bothered you, I'm sorry. No explosions this talk. Well, if there are any, then I'll be just as surprised as you are about it. So that'll be good. Just as a general housekeeping note, you guys feel free to interject or talk or ask questions or heckle or whatever you want to do. I know it's a little early in the morning for that, but yeah, it's good. Actually, if anyone wants to yell out your favorite barnyard animal at any point, I will be okay with that. My name is Evan Booth. I'm Evan Booth on Twitter. I'm also Evan Booth on Earth as a human man. I work for a company called Skookum, skookum.com, just a full-service development shop based in Charlotte. We're going to get into the talk, but before we do, I think I've got sort of a gift and a curse sort of thing where my mind is constantly just barraged with a bunch of random thoughts, and some of those things stick around and they bounce around for a while and they persist. And so what I like to do before I really get into the talk is take a few minutes and just unload a few of those rounds from my shotgun of random. And so here we go. Someone needs to take and develop a little kit with some little matte black stickers of various sizes, and maybe a little maybe some chrome bits here like this guy, and maybe a sticker that says motion activated, so that I can go around and place them on things that are not. All right, you ever see those Secret Service guys with their earpiece right here? So you assume that they're blocking out sound and they're talking on something right here, but this is what's actually happening. Right here. That's who they're talking to. Shotgun random. Cool. How many of you are developers in here? Developers and programmers? Wow, okay, all right. That's easily 90%. Great. So what you need to do as a developer when you leave here is go and write some software that will, anyone familiar with the Doppler effect? Doppler effect?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? It's like when a car passes and he's blowing his horn, it's like, you know what I'm talking about? Good. Okay. So yeah, someone needs to do motion tracking on a car, so you can adjust the pitch and the volume from a giant loudspeaker, right? So in the car, the sound comes across as a consistent volume, and a consistent pitch. So just really freak people out, right? So like all of your friends know, right? You're driving along the interstate and you hear that in the car, you probably poop yourself. That would be awesome. So someone go write that. That'd be great. Thanks. Somewhere in the very opposite corner of the world, someone is having a conference with all of our doppelgangers, right? Except the theme of the conference is how to forget everything about, developing software. Cool, that's it. All right, so that was the shotgun at random. I'm glad we got that out of the way. My talk is called Jittery MacGyver, which is literally kind of the first name that I came up with. But really, this talk today is about potential. I want to talk a lot about potential. Potential is something that for me, and just the way that I'm built, and the way that the millions of synapses have formed in my brain over time, it just makes me really, really excited about potential. Specifically, sort of finding potential in everyday things, right? Ordinary stuff. And there have been a few really great examples of this sort of thing throughout history. And obviously there are a lot of them that were kind of born of problems that would help companies financially, or that's kind of what drives innovation nowadays. How do we get more transistors on a wafer of silicone, whatever. But the ones that I like are the ones that they're sort of born of passion or necessity, right? So great example is this guy, George Washington Carver. Now, what is he known for? Peanuts, right? But this guy, seriously, I really I heard a book report about him in third grade, and that was kind of the collection of knowledge that I've been carrying around about George Washington Carver. But having gone back and dug a little deeper, this is a really cool guy, like insanely awesome, did a lot of stuff. He accomplished more in a lifetime than like I could even wrap my head around. But yeah, he did a lot with peanuts. He really he saw the peanut and thought to himself, and all of this really was kind of the main driver behind this is to help poor farmers and to help educate them and teach them how to become profitable. But and actually like he did a lot of education, a lot of teaching, and so he took a teaching job at this university, and they didn't tell him this, but he got there and realized like he didn't even have a lab at all, right? And like that's his classroom pretty much. So Joker went to a junkyard, found a bunch of stuff, and just like built a lab. That's what he did. That's a cool guy. I want a bobblehead of him. But yeah, he did a few things with peanuts. Made all this stuff, right? That's insane. This is what it looks like to find potential in a little tiny thing like this, right? And do that with like monster truck force. That's crazy. Another really interesting example for me is sort of what happened in Cuba. Now, I try to steer clear of like politics and like economics and pretty much all of that stuff because it kills my inner child. But my understanding of this is that like it's a single party political system. Most people are employed by the government. Most industry is owned and operated by the government, right? And so what you end up with is a lot of the same stuff kind of across the board. Everyone gets sort of the same stuff. And because of that, like there was a huge boon in like DIY culture in Cuba. And it's not like because people were bored and they got on Pinterest. Actually, like I think 5% of the whole population of Cuba has internet access at all. But no, it was out of necessity. They were like, well, we've got these problems, and we got this stuff. It's kind of like this ubiquitous set of things that everyone has. How do we solve problems with this? And entire industries were kind of formed out of that sort of thing. And it was kind of like a result of a struggle, right? And the government they called this actually the special period in time of peace, right? Which is kind of hand wavy, but some of the things that came out of this special period in time of peace were things like this, where they take a bicycle, right, slap like a freaking 2-liter bottle on it with fuel, take a motor and throw it on there, and you've got a rickabilly, right? It's a little motorcycle. And these things are actually not legal to own, but it's just sort of like one of those things that are sort of accepted, but not necessarily like technically legal. But yeah, stuff like this, and also this guy right here. Anyone want to take a guess as to what this does? Besides kill you really fast? Oh, yeah, it is a taser, but what is it supposed to do? This is a hearing aid battery recharger. This recharges hearing aid batteries. Someone figured out that this recharges hearing aid batteries. I wonder how many prototypes and how many, hospital visits it took to figure that out. But cool stuff like that. So like on the left here, we have basically a gravity-powered motor starter. They would take a big weight and lift it up, and upon dropping it, that flywheel would spin up, and they would use that torque to start motors because starters break, right? We can't replace the starters. What do? Like our take-home pay is $20 a month. We're all employed by the government. Well, I'm going to make this thing and start some motors with it. This over here is a irrigation system of some sort, just kind of cobbled together, right? Here's another great example. So everyone, like every household, had these metal food trays, and people started using them and figured out how to make antennas out of them to get like better, television reception or something. And so like the skyline of Cuba is literally like littered with these TV trays, which is amazing to me. And so the government kind of like saw this, and they were like, well, how do we get in front of this? Oh, I got it. We'll make the book for the family, which is kind of like a giant collection of like popular mechanics and like, do-it-yourself guides and sort of like, anarchist cookbook stuff. And it was basically like recipes for MacGyvering solutions to, people's like common daily struggles, right? So pretty interesting stuff. They followed it up with Our Own Efforts, which is another guide. And just a few examples here. There's a transformer there, there's some sketches. And this is some rope and pulleys, and it appears to be a rudimentary kill-yourself machine or something. I don't know. Oh, sure.
Quick announcement. If you're parked in the Roosters parking lot or the Bed Bath & Beyond parking lot, you're going to need to move your car over here. You might get towed. Also, tweet at Cinemark and yell at them for trying to consume the entire parking lot for whatever reason. So please complain to Cinemark.
Is that the one directly behind the theater?
What's that?
Is that the one directly behind the theater?
I don't know. I know Roosters. If I'm looking at the theater, Roosters is over here. I don't know where Bed Bath & Beyond is. Actually, I don't know. Sorry. That way?
Yeah, because I'm parked very, very back of the main part.
What is Roosters? Is it a chain?
Yeah.
We don't have those.
Roosters do. Tell them they suck. I'll do it, guys. Just did. I'm going to do it in person.
You can't tweet in person.
Wait, did you get that? I just sent
Hashtag you suck, man. Dude, what are you talking about? I'm right here. No, you're good. This is an AK-47 on some kind of tripod or something. I don't really know. This is my favorite one though. It's Das Plasmatizador, right? So you basically take settled Italian dressing, you attach that with some kind of like god-awful needle with whatever is in here, ghost tears, unicorn blood, this whatever that is. You attach that to, it looks like the compressor from a refrigerator, and of course the final step is plugging that into the wall, which is a fantastic idea when you're dealing with the plasmatizador, right? So yeah, this stuff is all going down in Cuba. Pretty much one of the things that sort of settled as an icon or a good representation of this whole thing is the Eureka washer and dryer, which really kind of just became the washer because the dryer would always crap out. It had some mechanical problems, and so these things would always fail. So one thing that people would do all the time with these things is just cut them right in half, right? Because it's a perfectly good washer, it still works, you don't want to take up that extra space, just get rid of that dryer, and we could use those parts for other things. Because the fail point wasn't actually the motor of the dryer, it was some other stuff, right? So people started using that motor for like pretty much everything. So this is a coconut shredder. This is an automated key duplicator, right? Really cool stuff. I don't know what this is, but you don't want to touch it probably. This is for repairing shoes, and you see these things everywhere. So let's take a boat propeller and slap it on this thing and call it a fan that could also kill you, right? But yeah, a lot of this stuff was going down in Cuba, and some really, really interesting stuff came out of that, right? So that's people finding the full potential of what's around them. Great examples of that. Some examples from my own story, and actually from the talk about the TSA. Kind of the whole driver behind that was figuring out what weapons you could build just with stuff inside of an airport terminal, right? So finding the potential and stuff that's really common and easily accessible. Another one was a project I work on called Practical Post-Apocalyptic Electronics. So I started thinking about the fact that, more and more, obviously, we're relying on electricity and things powered by it, right? And also, at the same time, I think fewer and fewer people actually have, a cursory understanding of electricity and how it behaves and, what it's all about. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, if I wanted to educate just anyone, person off the street, right? Wanted to educate them and get them in a position where they could do practical things with electricity, what would be the least amount of information and the fewest number of concepts that would be required or, for anyone basically to get work done, do it practically with electricity. And so I spent some time thinking about that, and sort of the practical arm of this exercise was a project called The Shack. And this is a little 6x11 shack in Kentucky that my grandpa built for me when I was 10, right? As a little spy office or whatever. But yeah, this is out in the middle of Kentucky, and obviously in the woods. And so I decided to spend a week in the shack. And I brought along a bunch of stuff that you'd find around the house. So like I actually had a Keurig, I had some like yard tools, some other stuff, like just a bunch of like common stuff that you'd find around the house or in your garage. And just spent some time kind of like retrofitting this shack, which had no electricity or anything like that, with some things that you would need to to make a shack a home, right? And so this is actually walking up to the shack for the first time since I was 12. Oh crap! I don't have it. Oh, never mind. Okay. Yep. So there's only one thing to do after that. I drop a nuke from low orbit. It's really the only way to be sure. Well, I didn't end up nuking my shack because I wanted to stay there for a week. So I spent like 2 days just cleaning it up, and I ended up taking and like putting plastic on all the walls and like make it look like Dexter's kill room, right? And I took some of that expanding foam stuff, that you like seal things with. I took like, I don't know, 30 bottles of that, and like basically just like completely like, I sealed up every single crack that I could possibly imagine a spider crawling through. And still, like, the spiders got in there. I don't even know how. They're like magicians or something. I don't know. But anyways, so yeah, I started looking at lighting, basic lighting. I don't know if you know, it's like taking a full bottle of water and put a flashlight to it, right? It acts as a diffuser and sort of like, scatters that light around. Makes a really nice fixture in the middle of the room. So I took a little tchotchke LED flashlight from like a conference or something, took the actual lighting element out of that, and mounted that to the top of this bottle of water, hung it up in the middle of the room, and hey, you got like a Nuka-Cola kind of lighting situation going on there. So for actually like powering all this stuff, I had a little board like especially for that, and I wanted to do a 12-volt source and a 5-volt source, right? 12 mostly because that's kind of what the like what you'd find in like automotive. It's a common voltage. And 5, obviously, because that's like since USB, everything kind of it runs on 5 volts or whatever. And I figured that like if the crap hits the fan, there's going to be a ton of those little like rechargeable batteries around here. I'd like to be able to take one of those and plug it in and use that to power my stuff. So these are my 5-volt leads here. This is strong sad. Any Homestar Runner fans in here? Oh, good. I miss them. So. Yeah, this is just a cigarette lighter adapter from a car, right? So I'm taking my wait, shoot, I got that backwards. Yeah, this is actually the 12 volts here, and I'm running that through my cigarette lighter adapter, ending up with 5. And actually, I figured out that if you run the 18, almost 19 volts that come out of these like cordless drill batteries and all that stuff, run that backwards through this particular wall wart, that comes out with like a somewhat steady 5 volts. So I've got some options, right? So if I have those batteries, I can plug them in. I've got my 5 volts. Otherwise, I got my little USB stuff, right? So this actually runs off to like a small ATV battery, which puts out 12 to 14 volts as well. And that voltage runs into my control board. And I kind of wanted to accomplish 3 things. So I wanted to work out lighting. I wanted to to kind of like start building a framework for automation stuff, for like safety and all that. And I wanted to make an alarm system in my shack, and I wanted to kind of get this done in a week. So I had 3 switches to get this done. So I just hit forward. So this like toggles the light. This guy right here toggles whether or not the light comes on when you open the door, and this switch here would activate your alarm, right? And so I used different stuff just to illustrate the fact that like if you had to in a pinch, like you could use some really off-the-wall stuff to build a switch. So we'll kind of get into some of the specific stuff here. So like, who knows what this is right here? Anybody? This is an electromagnetic relay. Anyone familiar with those? Cool. Okay. Yeah. So just real quick. So, has anyone ever like built or played with an electromagnet? That'll a nail experiment when you wrap it with copper and you put some juice to it and it can pick up paper clips and stuff. So basically, there's a tiny electromagnet inside of this guy right here, and that is sitting up next to this spring-loaded arm, metal arm, right? And so when you supply voltage to that electromagnet, it draws that arm to it. When you take the voltage off, it springs back. Now, what happens when that happens is as you become an English major, basically you could have voltage running from this point here up to another conductor here. So that's one path. Turn it on, it snaps back, and it goes to a different path. Like in programming, what does that resemble? What am I talking about? Kind of like an if statement, right? Exactly. And what you get into is because you got like most like common relays you'll find are either double pole single throw or double pole double throw, which basically says that like you might have two of those arms doing the same thing, so you could have 4 different pathways there. And what you get into is like you can start building logic gates with these things, and suddenly you could start building anything with these. Like you could freaking build a CPU if you want to, right? It would just take a lot of space and time. People have done it in Minecraft, right? So if you want to start integrating conditional logic into your post-apocalyptic shack, relays are a good place to start, and they're really they're kind of everywhere. You guys brought a lot of them with you today if you drove, right? So if you were to pop the hood of your car, you'll probably find a handful of them in there. They operate on 12 volts, as car stuff does typically. So basically what a relay does is it's good for connecting higher voltage current, right, or a higher voltage circuit with low voltage. So if I have like 5 volts, I could apply that to this relay and then connect up to 120 volts AC, right? So like it's a good way to turn a lamp on with an Arduino or something like that. Keeps you from burning out your Arduinos. So in a car, like when you turn on the headlights, right, you're not actually connecting all of the current required to power your headlights with that switch. It'd be really hot and it would be really expensive, right? Instead, they use a cheaper switch that just sends a small amount of current to a relay, which connects the stuff that is required to power your headlights. Does that make sense? Relays, great stuff. You could also find them in your home. When you're at home and it's quiet, how do you know when the AC is about to kick on? Right, you hear a click. That's a relay clicking, right? So it's connecting all the juice required to do your AC stuff. All right, so this is a pretty gnarly switch. And I like this because when you actually close the switch, you have to have the key to open it. And that's naturally for the alarm. So let's see. For the automation stuff, I popped open a a leaf blower, battery-powered leaf blower. I took this little momentary switch from the leaf blower and I tacked that up to the wall. So when the door is shut, that switch is closed, and when it opens up, then I can turn my lights on. Even put a little status LED in here, just in case you can't tell if the door is open or not. You can look at your status indicator. Actually, there's a bunch of them in Kentucky because lightning bugs just kind of flood in if the door is open. So little status LEDs everywhere, right? Cool. So now when I walk up to my shack and I'm worried about getting eaten by spiders, at least when I open the door, the light's going to cut on for me, which is nice. But only if that little pull chain is on. So the alarm system, I looked into that next. And in order to do an alarm, you don't want a similar setup with a door switch, right? Because you don't want it to turn off if someone were to close the door back, right? So I wanted to build a latching relay. And that's actually pretty simple to do if you've got a few relays. But I took a slightly more complex, a little more difficult, more ambitious approach with the latching relay, and went a little more low tech with it. So I took the head unit out of a car, and so all the stuff runs on 12 volts. And so I wanted this little motor assembly right here, because I wanted to do some work with it, right? And so This is it just running real quick, and I'll explain it after the video. Cool. So basically what happens is when you put 12 volts to this guy here, this motor spools up, this guy starts spinning, it starts winding up this string, this trot line, right, which eventually yanks this little plastic tab out from between the clothespin. And that clothespin has two leads coming off of it, right? So when that plastic tab gets yanked out of the way, it closes that circuit. And all of this 32 volts here runs through that's the particular wire, right? And so now you've got a situation where you supply power, and even if you take that power off, right, it's too late at that point, right? The work's already done. And so for the alarm system, what I did was I ran that 32 volts down through a thin copper wire around the fuse of the weasel, right? And I mounted the weasel on the wall. So this happens. It sounded like a car alarm, but it was a bird. Frickin' Kentucky, am I right? I love it. So the takeaway, if you don't learn anything else, learn that like fireworks are best spent inside your home. Set them off because the smell lingers for so long, and it's glorious. It smells like being young again, right? So anyway, so yeah, that was my time in the shack, and I kind of after I got back and sort of processed the stuff and was reflecting on the time there, I kind of got the sense that maybe the scope was a little broad and a little tough to digest because of that. So I thought about, okay, well, if the situation in Cuba were to happen here, right? What would be our washing machine? What would be our dryer motor? What could we use for that? And so I started thinking about that, and I thought about the Keurig, right? Anyone open up a Keurig? There's a video playing behind that image, I think. Something's happening. Yeah, anyone open a Keurig by chance, like some random chance, right? There's a lot of great stuff in there. So yeah, let's take one apart real quick. It takes about 2 hours to do this if you're being careful and sort of like nulling things out. You have to drum on the box before you open it, or else it won't work. So yeah, definitely speeding this up considerably. Wouldn't it be cool to move that fast? Wouldn't that be awesome? You have to think you'd like hurt yourself all the time. Just be banging into stuff. It's a good way to make a mess. Right, so things that you'll find inside of a Keurig. Now, the components internally have changed sort of as the product has evolved, right? Actually, in like newer models, you find less variety of different components and stuff, but you almost always find a little LCD module, and that may actually have some of the stuff that the Keurig requires that's not display related or input related. A good example is this guy right here. This looks a pretty heavy duty pressure module, pressure sensor. So you just feed attach that to a little rubber tube, and you'll be able to gauge pressure that way. Little momentary switches here. Obviously your standard battery of capacitors and resistors. You got some LEDs on here as well. Almost always find like a discrete control board. You'll find relays on this. You'll find some transformers on this. Nice little switches and everything. Or not switches, connectors. Let's see, some active components, maybe like a 555 timer or analog to digital converter. You might find some of that stuff on there. Some nice little ribbon cables here. There's a transformer. A lot of these have sort of discrete power regulator boards that take in that 120 volts AC and then convert that into whatever the Keurig needs, which is usually like a solid 12 volts, and then I think 3.3 for like the logic. So you'll find a boiler as well, and the size of these things varies quite a bit. And like, what else here? So like for the boiler, there are a few security features. There is a thermal cutoff, keeps it from overheating and all that stuff. Real quick, anyone like familiar with like the basic operation of a Keurig or something like that? So like show of hands, who in here would assume? Don't show your hand yet, sir. You don't know the question. That was misleading. Who would assume in here that when you turn on your Keurig and it's heating up the water in the boiler, that happens under pressure? Maybe, yeah. I thought so. Actually, it doesn't, right? So, and I was kind of disappointed by that because I was hoping to be able to write some nasty firmware and make that go out of control. But basically, it boils into the atmosphere. And if anyone can think about their Keurig and like the little right angle little elbow thing at the very top of the water reservoir, you know what I'm talking about? That actually is for condensation to drip back in from the boiler, right? So you'll see that. You'll see a variety of tubing, enough tubing in there to choke a donkey, generally. There's some nice little metal bits, variety of screws. And actually, like this is diminished substantially in the newer models. They've gotten rid of a lot of that stuff. Some springs, some bar stock. A motor, almost always a motor, some sort of motor. The older ones have just like a regular DC brushless motor. This one came out of one of the like a Keurig View model, which is I think a little higher end. And I can see why, because this thing is freaking awesome right here, right? So it's actually a stepper motor, has built-in a Hall effect sensor. You could tell exactly how far the motor is turned, and you could use that to determine whether or not like it's actually traveled as far as it should have, right? So you could actually measure resistance with that. This thing has I don't know if you see this little. It's kind of tough to see this little like half disc right here. See that? Right. So that actually slides in between. This little like kind of like make or break infrared sensor, and that can tell you what hemisphere, right, this thing is turning in, just as a redundant way of telling exactly where that motor is positioned, or this little arm is positioned, right? What else does this thing do? Yeah, if you give this thing a supply voltage, it has a built-in like electronic speed controller, so you can supply a pulse width modulated signal at 5 or I think it's over 3 volts, right? And then it controls the speed. If you pull one of these leads down to ground, then it reverses. Just a bunch of crazy stuff. There's a brake on this thing. It's ridiculous. So I was really hoping that when I popped open one of these 2.0 Keurigs for the first time, that I would find a similar motor, but not quite, right? So like the one in the 2.0 is very similar. It's got the same gear assembly and all that stuff. It actually has the little half hemisphere little make or break thing, but it uses like a clunky DC motor, but still very good. And by very good, I mean has a ton of potential, right? You'll almost always find little air pumps. Some of the older ones have fluid pumps in as well. All of this stuff runs on 12 volts. Older ones will have a solenoid in them, which is great. Which is basically just opens and closes the valve, and that's good for air or water. So yeah, let's talk about like basic functionality real quick for a Keurig. So you will almost always find like a control board here. There's a boiler. This is your solenoid. Basically, the water gets pumped down and gets pumped up into the boiler. Something you know what? It's just a bunch of witchcraft. I have no idea. It's a really complex piece of machinery. But I jest, but. Really, like that's kind of like not the point. I don't want to build another coffee machine, right? I want to build other stuff. So, given the variety of things you could find in a Keurig, what could you build with that, right? Like pretty much anything. That's a huge variety of stuff. as a quick example, I was at a conference and they had a little electronic badge, and it was kind of like one of those situations where badge hacking is encouraged. So I had a Keurig with me, and so I took some of the parts and built a drink distributor, right, or a beverage distributor. And so basically, I've got let's see, yeah, I've got my little 12-volt air pump here, a solenoid, a couple of these little like leaf, momentary switches. And this one right here, if I hold this down, this thing spools up, pumps air into this thing, which forces the beverage up another path. But only if I've got this other button pressed down, which would open up the solenoid and allow the delicious beverage to come out of the little teapot. I'm a little teapot spout here. So I actually have that here. Let me do a quick demo. Let's see. Boop. Hey. And I'm making a mess. So yeah, just one of the very many super useful things that you could build out of Keurig stuff. But yeah, so I wanted to work on a project that was a little more ambitious. Thought a lot about this, and I wanted to work on something that wasn't brand new, right? Something that people had already been making really good progress on in different spaces. So I looked at doing an articulated hand, and the reason for this, and the reason that I chose this as opposed to something that's completely novel, is because like there's some like I said, really great work happening like in this particular space, like 3D printed prosthetics. Like that is a huge, like super amazing thing for people who have were either born without limbs or have had amputations. Because like this guy right here, even though it looks completely badass, you'd probably pay 80 grand for it, right? It's like insanely expensive and kind of out of the reach for some people. And so what you'll find now in this space is like things like this, which is $10 of material and some parts and like a functional prosthetic, and that's just amazing. So I started looking at what I can do with just the material inside of one Keurig, and iteration is a huge part of any like creative process. So I started with like super basic, right? So like how do I make something that can like grip, essentially? So this is kind of like the Mark I prototype, and let's see, I think this is the video, yeah. All right, so super crude, not particularly useful, right? But from a design perspective, like these little iterations, they help me understand the materials, help me understand how things work together, and how to best approach or how to improve on that, right? So I went from here and started looking into like individual digits. How would you do that with the stuff inside of the Keurig? And so I started looking at using some of that rubber tubing as kind of like an elastic, like a rubber band, basically. And so mounting that stuff on the back would, extend the digit, and then supplying tension on a line that runs on the opposite side obviously makes things contract. So this particular thing was, I think, a good result, but there was a little too much horizontal instability. I got sassy there. I didn't even mean to. Look at that. Yeah, so I went from there and kind of like iterated again. This time with a little more stability. And in each one of these things, figuring out like, what my snakes in the grass would be when I'm trying to make something that is actually functional. So coming off this, I felt like I sort of had all the ammunition I needed to kind of start a build, like a legit build. And so I started recording, start to finish. And so it's not quite done just yet. I've got a full-time job and a toddler, so everything is kind of like always tentative. But this is sort of where we are now, and what we're looking at here is about, I think, like what I'll show you is about 35 hours of just hands-on work, right? So that doesn't include time like thinking about how to put things together or really like necessarily looking at the material much. Like that's 35 hours like tools on material, like, you know, either sanding or, you know, cutting or filing or whatever. So let me show you that real quick. So basically, I feel like I've got a good like natural motion with the fingers now. These things are actually connected, you know, to these tendons down here, and so I can articulate this way. Really, kind of like the gap that I've got to bridge now is, and this is like step 0 for this forearm, but mounting up this this motor, right, inside of this guy right here, and this would provide the linear pull, and it's these things are hella torquey. I just said hella. It's like the 90s, right? Well, yeah, this is supply plenty of torque, you know, to move these tendons and close the fist, right? So let me play this video real quick, just to give you an idea of just like I don't know. I feel like when you look at like something like this, or you're thinking about it, or thinking about how to build it, you think about like, well, you know, like, yeah, I'll use this for the fingers, or like, you know, this is how this thing will work particularly, and I feel like. Because, you know, I write software, and like I think through engineering problems all the time. Like this, to me, like one of the takeaways for me was that like when I'm talking to someone about how to build something, right? Really, like one of the biggest indicators of experience is how much attention is paid to the structure, right, and the integration piece, right? So like you could think through a problem. If I give you a rubber ball and a mousetrap and some rubber bands, and you have to, you know, accomplish a certain thing, like it's one thing to say, okay, well the rubber ball will roll and hit the mousetrap and do this other thing, but like there's so much more to that. That's actually not the hard part of solving problems like that. Really, like the issues that are the most time-consuming and often the most challenging are like, how do you keep the mousetrap still, or how do you direct the ball, or what's like the underlying structure that actually it keeps this stuff together, and does so in such a way that you know makes your approach viable at all, right? So just something I found interesting. But here we go. Each of the finger segments is plastic heated up and molded.
I got lots of speed. I got lots of something. I got lots to bleed. I got nothing
Still working on those finger segments.
I got nothing up my sleeves. I got nothing worthy. I got nothing for you to see. But fuck it, 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 but fuck it. Let's see you, let's see you. You got words so softly. You got better things to do. You got that without me. I got that without you too. You got something special. You got something wrong with you. You got nothing perfect. I got nothing to hide from you. But fuck it, but fuck it, but fuck it.
I'm starting to build the actual like elbow pieces that will hold the axle, right, that these fingers rotate on.
Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it right. Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it now.
Starting to wire in tendons. Had to clean up a bit. Now looking for good material to like build up the rest of the hand, the palm. Forming these parts with that heat gun there. That's a brick. More structural stuff. Those little bear claw things are like guides for the actual like lines, the tendons.
Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it right. Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it. Let's see you work it now.
I'm cutting my elastic stuff, getting that in there. Step one with the forearm there. Cool. All right. So, any quick questions about that in particular? Anything jump out? Cool. All right. So, yep, right there. Oh, good question. So, yeah, that's a good point actually. I wanted to keep the tools really limited. Has anyone spent some time on YouTube looking at at people building things and like all that stuff? And they have these like incredible workshops and like every tool imaginable. Well, hang on a sec. Let me get my prosthetic finger cutter out. Puts it in there and it spits out the thing. Or if you really want a good appreciation of 3D printing, right? Do this for a while, right? So I kept the tools really limited. Really, just use a Dremel for most everything. And hand tools, right? So lots and lots of filing, as you saw, which is actually like one of the takeaways too. Like if you're working with inexact measurements and you don't exactly know what the final product is going to look like or how it should function, always err on the side of more material is better. You could always cut it back, you could always file it down, right? But you'll want it there if you need it, basically, right? I used the Dremel for most everything. Used the heat gun for a lot. And hand tools, and that's really it. Hacksaw, yeah, that's kind of it. So yeah, I mean, this would have been a lot quicker with with a bandsaw or like a scroll saw or something. Even most of the filing I did by hand. That was I should have taken a picture of my ceiling. There's a bunch of bits of melted plastic stuck to it. It's like a bunch of little black specks. It looks like inverse space, right? So the mask was for flying debris. When you're cutting plastic like this, it's kind of thick, right, with a regular cutting wheel. Even if the kerf is really thin, it heats up, starts to melt, and starts going everywhere, right? And so like now and then you'll get a piece that lands on your forearm, and you just like do your forearm dance, But yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So basically to protect my face. Any other questions? Cool. So, some of the takeaways. What's that? Oh, sanding. That and keeping the heat slightly further away from my workbench. And it's good for putting parts on so you could get different angles with a file or hand tools. And the bricks are great. Ben folds fine. This is not a fast process. This is a slow process, and there's a lot of reasons for this, right? Just like taking this thing apart and making an adjustment and putting it back together, you're looking at 45 minutes, minimum, right? Depending on what you do when you get it apart. So, like I've said multiple times here today, like iteration is hugely important with a thing like this because you don't go in with a blueprint of something that's proven, right, or something like is going to work. You go in with an idea, you try, you take your best shot at it, and you try it out. You learn from that, and then you make small adjustments, right? And so that's a very time-consuming thing when you're dealing with inexact construction like this. So I mentioned this earlier. Like, don't be greedy with the material if you don't really know like your final measurements and all that stuff. This is a great just like tactical thing. CA glue, super glue, right? Cyanoacrylate glue, I think is what it's called. It basically relies on a chemical reaction to perform the bond. You can kick that. It's called kicking it, right? They make little sprays for that, which basically just like sets your crazy glue instantly. Or with stuff like this, again dealing with inexact, baking soda is fantastic. It does the same thing. It kicks it, but it also adds material, right? Because your baking soda becomes part of your glue essentially, and it's sandable and all this stuff. So if you're trying to like fill gaps in plastic parts or whatever, CA glue plus baking soda is fantastic. So a big takeaway for me is this is not a car, right? This is not a bike pump. This is not a toaster, right? This is an organization of materials that happens to perform a function well. So I really wish that more people would sort of adopt that mindset, especially when like solving problems, right? So when things break, they don't become garbage; they become potential because you've got a lot of stuff with one broken thing in it, right? So something to keep in mind, and I think that even just from a practical standpoint, like if you start thinking that way about like physical things around you, I think that would probably translate over into digital as well. So sort of the last takeaway here, and the big thing for I think crowds like this, because our basic function as professionals is to build things, right? Would you agree with this? Like we create, we build. And a lot of us, we sort of do that not because it's something that pays our Time Warner bill, whatever. We like doing it. Who got into this because you like doing it? You like building. You like programming. Like you probably do this stuff if you didn't get a paycheck for it, right? Like that's my case. So something to keep in mind is this, right? You don't have to change the world to establish a precedent. Does anyone know who Cody Wilson is? He's the guy who made the first 3D printed gun, the Liberator. Familiar? He said something the other day in an interview, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly what he said, but it stuck with me. And he was talking. It was talking about politics or something, and I don't really care about that stuff. But the thing that he said, I think, is really important. And he said, and again, I'm paraphrasing, the most substantial and most impactful political thing you could ever do is actually like doing something, right? Is as bringing something into existence that people thought could not be done. And he was talking about in the context of 3D printed magazines for like an AR-15, right? So like high capacity magazines are completely 3D printed, right? So that's a thing that could happen now because he did it, right? And so like nothing could change that. And like as people who build, that's a really fun thing to keep in mind. And like as you're working on your little like quirky like offbeat like the thing people would say you have too much time on your hands for doing, I don't know, like building a hand out of a coffee maker, right? That stuff doesn't have to get you an invite to the White House or I don't know, 1 million views on YouTube for it to be important, right? For it to be successful or for you to establish a precedent with that. Does that make sense? Right? It just has to be done, right? It has to be. It has to exist. And so I guess my challenge would be if you have an idea or something like that, build early. Like get your hands on it early. Start like actually producing something. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? It doesn't have to be completely ironed out or bug-free or like an MVP or like ready to go or anything like that. It just has to happen. And so keep that in mind, right? So to that I would say you should never, ever, ever, ever stop building. And that's what I have for you today. Does anyone have any questions? I was thinking about this the other day. So that's a fantastic question. Probably. I was thinking about a soldering iron. You could definitely solder. But a heat gun, yeah, you could build a heat gun. Yeah. So I mean, you've got your heating elements. Let me think. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So what I would do in that case is I would probably take some of the thinner plastic, fabricate some propellers, right, and then attach that to one of these brushless motors, which they spin pretty fast. And then just have that blow over the coils that you've supplied, 120 volts to. What was the other thing? Heat gun and the Dremel. Same thing. I would probably. You would have trouble building a blade, I think, because you would have to have something harder than. You could probably just file it down. Yeah, that would take some work. That's interesting, though. I love thinking about that stuff. I'm glad you asked. I think you were next. So this particular thing is just one. I wanted to see if I could get it done with one, but over the course of my shenanigans with the Coffeemaker, and this guy actually is slated to explode. I'm going to figure out the fewest number of steps required for you to flip it on, and for the boiler to fail catastrophically. That's going to be fun. And another thing that I worked on was kind of the beginnings of a kind of a steampunk rifle. And so essentially it's kind of doing that, but I had everything sort of laid out. And I had two boilers with a couple pumps and solenoids, and I had it set up to where like you'd have a reservoir, you could pump water into a boiler, heat it up, and then very suddenly release that pressure through a shaft, a cylinder, right? So think a barrel with things in it that would come out fast. What else? Yeah. Probably six Keurigs, 7, all in all. Craigslist is amazing. It's great because I show up and they'd be like, yeah, it's kind of dirty. I'm like, it's okay. It's fine. It doesn't matter. Who was next? I think you were.
Yeah, in the UK there was a guy who built it.
Yes!
Have you ever thought of doing
Thought of doing
it?
what?
The guy, he went and mined the actual metal from the earth, and then smelted it down, and then built it and started it.
Yeah.
There's actually quite a bit of information. Have you ever thought of doing anything like that?
Doing like specifically like building like one of these? Well, I used to like farm potatoes. Does that count? No, yeah, seriously, if you guys haven't seen that, that's freaking amazing. This guy, like, he went to the store and he's like, I found a toaster for $8 or something. And it's like, how does this happen, right? So he took one of those things and like broke it out into all the components. And so like he was like, okay, well, these are, electronics. I need some silicone. I'm going to go mine some silicone, right? And like, did his own smelting and stuff and built what looked like a toaster from a horror flick or something, like a swamp creature kind of thing, but like absolutely amazing. I think it was a TED Talk, right? He did a TED Talk. Yeah, that was a thoroughly badass. You were next. I hope so. No, that's happening at. Wait, did you say Star Trek? Yeah, man, my own joke went over my head just now. That's brilliant. And you look like the guy from Shaun of the Dead. You do what? Nice. That's good. The more things like that should happen. Anybody else? Cool. Thank you guys so much for your time.